Hello and welcome back to another in-depth edition on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director here at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. It's also a great pleasure to have with us today Dr. Daniel French, who is the Secretary of the Agency of Education here in Vermont. Dr. French is well known to many of you from his time as the superintendent of the Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union, and we're really pleased to have him with us today by Zoom online. Dr. French, thank you, first of all, for making the time to be with us today and share with us some of your observations about what we've been going through the past month or so.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to see you.
Well, about a month or so ago, school buildings were closed down, but education continues on. Technically speaking, schools are open in terms of teaching remotely. I'm sure that's been a big heavy lift for a lot of educators and for folks up at the Agency of Education as well to get that up and running very rapidly. I'm sure this is a project that normally you might have thought we could spend a couple of years figuring this one out and how to do it properly, but you had a couple of weeks instead. So I guess basic question, just to kind of get us started here, how's that been going? What have you been hearing from educators around the state about how the remote learning has been proceeding?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's fair to say it's going fairly well. As you could expect, it's been a heavy lift in education. We didn't really have a roadmap to do this. I mean, in some ways, we're fortunate that other folks around the country and around the world went first in some ways. But I think, like all states, we're in the process of reinventing the new normal, so to speak, in education. And as you know, every state's on a different trajectory dealing with the virus, so that's a big part of it. We closed our schools immediately. That led to about a 2-week period of transition where we were really just asking school districts to maintain some basic academic connection with their students. And then when the governor announced, that we would keep school closed for the rest of the year for in-person instruction unless he ordered otherwise, we made that transition to what we call content. And we wanted to preserve as many of those contract days as possible for June. Assuming we might be able to do something relative to end of year, graduation, who knows, even maybe reopen school. So we wanted to give the system a break and preserve those teaching days. So we went live on continuity learning April 13th, but then we had half the state on April vacation immediately. And then last week we had the other half of the state out. So it's only now, last week of April, that we have the full state working at this idea of remote learning or continuity of learning. So, but as one could imagine, it's uneven, I think, around the state. Others, different parts of the states have different resources, and there's certainly an emphasis on using technology. As we're doing today, technology can be very effective for maintaining that connection between teachers and students and for delivering content. But in places where the technology isn't as robust, those districts have struggled. So in our definition of continuity of learning, we've left that fairly broad for districts to employ technology, but certainly any other means that they can to connect with students and deliver coursework. And we're seeing, as you can imagine, a wide range of solutions that our districts are inventing essentially to do that. So it's been interesting to watch unfold. The creativity of our educators is pretty phenomenal, and their dedication shines through. They're doing all kinds of things to serve students as best they can, but it's been challenging, to say the least.
And I'm sure it's going to be fascinating to do the postmortems on it afterwards to see how effective it was. I mean, I guess one of the things I've been hearing is that there's some concern that there will be a lag in student performance as a result of this. That come September or next year, we'll see some students that will struggle a lot more than they would have done had school continued as usual or through to June.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's and we can think of just the pure academic trajectory of students. No doubt this has been disruptive to that, but then you factor in the broader social and emotional impact of this crisis, not only on students, but their families and society. So schools played a critical role not only in the educating of students, but also in the social stability of our community. So this has been very disruptive on many levels, and no doubt we'll be focusing a lot of our efforts, I think appropriately, on emotionally and social supports for students and their families. We're spending some time now starting to think about what that looks like, particularly for the summer and going into the fall, and trying to reserve or earmark a lot of our federal dollars that are available in the crisis to focus on the supports of students, and whether that be academic support or the emotional supports they're going to need. But we anticipate that, as everyone does, to be a significant area of concern.
Well, looking ahead slightly, what have you been hearing, or what is the thinking going on about how school budgets are going to be affected by all this? I mean, we have a two-part problem, if you will, going on here. One obviously is the healthcare front, but also the economic front, and the two are, I guess, are going to be getting even more closely related in the near future. But obviously, with the economy of the state and not performing quite as was expected, perhaps in January or February, school budgets are likely to be impacted as well, or at least there won't be the same amount of money available to put into the education fund as was anticipated earlier this year. What is your sense about that? Is there going to be a workaround found to replace that lost revenue, or are we just going to have to do some severe cutting and trimming?
Yeah, probably some of all the above, I think. Certainly one variable that's emerged in the last couple of weeks has been focus on the federal dollars that are available to backfill, if you will, or at least support the education system. We call that the CARES Act, the first round of that anyway. We anticipate there to be other future rounds. But the challenge in Vermont is we have a very unique education funding system, in that we truly have a statewide funding system. So we have, the way this CARES Act has been set up, that 90% of that, and there's about $30 million coming to the state of Vermont in this first round, 90% of it has to go directly to school districts, assuming they have additional costs and so forth to support COVID-19 intervention. It doesn't really help us deal with the problem at the state level, which is a result of revenues falling off in the last quarter. So we, just to give you a sense of the magnitude, I think the revenue projections for the Ed Fund are showing, probably in the best case scenario right now, a $90 million deficit in fiscal year 20, the year we're in, finishing out the year we're in. In the CARES Act, is 30 million, so that still leaves a gap of about $60 million in the state, even if the 30 million that's going to districts could somehow be directed towards the state's obligation for K-12 education. So it's a very serious challenge just in the near term, fiscal year 20. And I'd say for the last maybe 12 days or so, we've been working, that conversation's been heated up, and been working directly with the legislature. I think the first step is just to merely wrap our arms around the magnitude of the problem, certainly to nail down to what extent federal revenues would be available or not to help. And I think that's just becoming clear now. And literally on Friday, today is Monday, on Friday, we received the application from the federal government to apply for those funds. So it's been a rapidly evolving situation, and we still don't have the specific guidance, so that's getting clearer all the time. So I think as we've gotten a better handle on what the federal support is going to be or not going to be, that's been an important variable to nail down. But it still leaves us in the legislature, with a very challenging problem, unprecedented problem, and I'm not sure quite how we're going to do it. Certainly trying to leverage the federal revenues as best we can will be part of the strategy, no doubt. But there's definitely going to have to be cost cutting or cost containment introduced as a strategy. There's just no two ways about it. And I don't think this will be resolved in the near term. It's going to be ongoing, because I think the estimate for fiscal year 20, the year we're in now, is pretty tough, but fiscal year 21 is going to look equally challenging. And And I think right now, in terms of fiscal year 21, meaning the budget year, that's, voters voted on their budgets in March. That begins on July 1st. School district fiscal year start on July 1st. I think my inclination is to give districts as much and boards as much information as possible about the context in which they're operating. So typically, we wouldn't really start to do that till October or December as they're formulating their budgets for the ensuing year. I think we'll start that process much earlier. And what I've observed so far from policymakers is there's a similar interest to sort of, I think, break the budget process down into increments and possibly, for instance, approve a state budget for several months and then come back again based on revised revenue projections or revised federal dollar amounts that are coming into the state. So I think it's going to be an incremental process going forward that will be based on frequent communication and just, at the state level, we have an education finance system that's done at the state level, but we don't have a statewide spending system. The spending's all done locally. So it's a bifurcated system. And I think we have to work hard to communicate both sides of that so that people can make good decisions going forward. But I expect it to be extremely challenging, for sure.
No doubt. I know this is not directly under your purview as the Secretary of the Agency of Education, but one of the big issues that popped up last week is the whole concern about the future of the state college system, and in particular a proposal to close 3 of the campuses, Northern Vermont University and Linden and Johnson, and one of the campuses, the one I think in Randolph, for the Vermont Technical College. And I know that proposal was withdrawn, but it highlighted the financial issues that had been a problem for the state college system for a while. It really came as, I suppose, no surprise, but Jeb Spalding, the chancellor of the state college system, said, I believe, that they would need about $25 million just to keep the system as it currently is up and running, even if those 3 campuses didn't close. Now, bearing in mind what you just said about how the economics of the pre-kindergarten through 12th grade public system is already going to be difficult, where will that $25 million come from? I mean, how do we work around that?
Yeah, it's a significant issue, and as you've read in the media, it's not something that's just the result of COVID-19. It's important to acknowledge this has been a long time coming, and I can remember this fall actually we were at a retreat of the State Board of Education, of which I'm a member, and in the same building, the trustees of the state college system were holding their annual retreat, and there was some conversation that day about them coming out with a statement that said they were going to close one of their campuses. And then at the end of the retreat, they ended up reaffirming they were going to keep everything open, So, and I, just listening to the stories that have been going in the media recently about, people acknowledging this has been a multi-year problem, going back 30, 40 years. And certainly to a certain extent described as an underfunding narrative, that there's been, it's often cited Vermont doesn't fund its state college system to the same extent as other states. I think, similar to K-12, which, is the area I've spent my career in, the more recent narrative, though, I would say it has to do with demographics and just understanding the business model that higher ed operates in. And it's, it's a different animal today due to technology to a certain extent, and the colleges have to find their way in that, and the demographics aren't changing, and the technology isn't changing, so it's a tough market to figure out. But last year we saw 3 or 4 colleges in Vermont close. To a certain extent the writing's on the wall unless we figure this out. So I think the legislature it's going to be very challenging. I think there are some parts of the infrastructure that are doing quite well. I was on a Zoom call the other day with the select board in Randolph and the president of VTC, Vermont Technical College, which is located in Randolph, and just to hear them talk through how vibrant that college is to a large extent. And similar, I would say, to the Community College of Vermont, also in pretty good financial shape, but they're part of this larger um, construct of the state college system. So it's not the whole system that's not doing well. There's parts of it that I think are probably worth salvaging, so to speak, and really making some strategic investments in. I think the challenge, though, when you hear the 25 million, is it's like $25 million to maintain the status quo isn't going to cut it for any of the policymakers. I mean, we really, I think what I'm hearing loud and clear from legislators is there's a commitment to try to find some bridge funding for the state college system, but not as business as usual. They really want to see some changes. So I think, those hard decisions are, as I was saying to a group of the trustees, I said, in K-12, we've been making those hard decisions since 2015 with Act 46, and no one's wanted to make those decisions, but those are the kinds of decisions we've had to struggle with. And if you contemplate Act 46, sort of beginning in 2010, actually, with Act 153, the voluntary approach to school district merger. So we were essentially on a 10-year process to do this, and ultimately ended up with Act 46 in the last couple of years being fairly onerous and top-down, forced consolidation. But now you look at COVID-19, and if you think Act 46 was too fast or less than thoughtful, the types of decisions we're having to make now are far more significant and far more challenging and far more immediate. The decisions we've had to make to survive, to transition to remote learning, happened in a very compressed time frame as a result of this health emergency. So the idea that we somehow have time to study or reimagine the state college system is really, I'm not sure it's really the appropriate response to the context we're in, when we've known for 40 some odd years that the system's underfunded. But now, in the last 10 years at least, the acknowledgement of the demographic challenge needs to be forefront, and certainly how technology has fundamentally changed the business models of higher education. These things need to be acknowledged in some reconciliation, and I think, unfortunately, that's now going to happen very quickly.
Mm. Shifting back to the pre-K through 12 system, this is probably a question that's probably the answer is probably too early to tell, but is it beginning to look like, or are you folks starting to plan around the idea of reopening the school buildings in September when the next school year would normally be starting, or is that just a case, hey, it's just too early to know where we're going to be at in terms of containing COVID-19?
Yeah, I think it's too early. We'd certainly like to. More immediately, I have a requirement to produce some guidance on end of this school year and relative to graduation. So the governor's tasked me to produce that guidance by May 8th. And I'm trying to hold off doing that to as long as I can. So this week, sort of getting the final analysis from our public health folks on the trajectory of the virus. And, we continue to be heartened by that work. When I say that work is really on the part of all Vermonters who have really followed the social distancing and really made sacrifices to get the positive effect we've had on restraining the growth of the virus. I think, as a state, we've done tremendous work in that regard, and we don't want to do anything that jeopardizes that. But we just don't have enough information on how this virus in particular behaves. So we're watching closely to see how other countries are doing relative to their schools. Denmark's opened some schools, Germany's opened some schools. So we're watching those things very closely. And, first thing is we'll figure out how to end this school year. And then we're moving pretty quickly into focused conversations about the summer, particularly to some of those issues we mentioned about students falling behind and so forth. We want to see if we can make an impact in the summer, if that's a good window of opportunity for us to do so. I'm not sure yet what that means. But then certainly focusing on the fall, we don't know yet at this point, but it would be my hope that we'd be able to get back to some sort of in-person instruction in the buildings. It might not be what we had before, but I think we have to start making those plans. And then, as you hear often, there's concern about a second blossoming of the virus if it follows the pattern of, well, let's say the Spanish flu in 1918. So we have to make sure we have all the control mechanisms in place. We need to have the testing, the monitoring, the tracing, in a robust manner that we don't currently have, but we're heading towards building that capacity. I think with those things in place, opening school is a real possibility.
And just a final question, just to try to end things on a bit of a positive note here. I guess I was just wondering if you, if over the past 5 or 6 weeks since we've been engaged with the coronavirus, have you seen any kind of positive things come out of remote learning, or some of the adaptations you've had to make, admittedly very fast and on the fly, that you thinking, hey, this might not be something that would be worth just sort of abandoning when we do get back to quote unquote normal, that this way of doing things might actually be better or save some money or be an improvement in one way or another?
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting things emerging. I think, one is we've deployed more teaching online for sure. In particular, high school, we've done an expansion of our Vermont Virtual Learning Cooperative. So I think you'll see more high school courses available online, which isn't necessarily a bad thing relative to considering how many small high schools we have in the state. So the ability to offer students a more expansive curriculum, hopefully that'll be an outcome. I think similarly, we're in the sort of early stages of building out some online infrastructure to allow teachers to work across district boundaries in the development of curriculum and good ideas. And all too often in Vermont, in my experience, that we have trouble sharing best practices across district boundaries. I mean, it's hard enough sometimes within the same school building, let alone across the district. So I think we have a lot of expertise in the state that we could share more broadly. In particular, when we think about equal opportunity, we have to have a commitment to ensuring that all students have access to high quality instructional material. So one way we can achieve that is to expand out sort of that development ecosystem for teachers as they're building and creating curriculum. And similarly, I think the issue, relative to the issue of technology, but equal opportunity, one of the things that's been really heartening to watch is that, the way Vermonters have come together in this crisis. We talked a lot over the past, before this emergency, around personalizing student learning or focusing on individuals. A lot of what we see emerging, as a necessity are people reaching out to individual families, individual students. I mean, I've done some of that work even as secretary, where we're trying to ensure a family has broadband, or are they being fed? So there's been a real, I think, emphasis on our ability to deliver services to individuals. And I think that's sort of the promise, I think, of the future of personalization, that I think particularly with technology, it has tremendous opportunity to build community, to connect us all together. And I think that's what's happened to a certain extent. At the same time, in spite of what that complexity might feel like, it brings with it the ability to assess the needs and address the needs of the individual. So we have the ability to understand more visibly when individual communities or individual community members aren't having their needs met, and we're able to zoom in on that. So I think, those patterns have been interesting to observe. And I think, the short of that is, I think, this crisis has brought us all closer together as a state and as one community, which has been great to be a part of. And I think will serve us well going forward after the emergency is over.
All right. Well, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much, Dr. French. Really appreciate you taking the time to bring us up to date on what's going on from your perspective up in Montpelier. And good luck going forward. And maybe we'll see you at one of these graduations one of these days soon.
Yeah. Take care. Good to see you.
Thanks again.
Bye.